Good morning, everybody. And we're just allowing you, we have a big crowd joining us this morning. So we're going to just allow people to get on the call first before we begin. But welcome and thank you for joining us. We were just remarking what a beautiful morning it was here in Dublin. So I hope it's the same for where you are this morning as you join us on the call. Okay, so I think we'll start to kick off because I see numbers there just stabilizing a little bit. So good morning, everybody, and you're all very welcome to this second webinar of ours from IHI for 2021. I just see from Deborah O'Hanlon that there's monsoon rain in Shannon. So sorry about that, Deborah. We're having a gorgeous morning here in Dublin, but good to hear from you. I'm delighted that you're joining the call. I would like to just to set a few ground rules just around the call, the usual virtual housekeeping. If I can ask you to keep your buttons, to keep your PCs on mute, to use the chat button for any questions that you might have, and to leave your cameras off. We're really looking forward to the conversation today, and we're asking you to be as interactive as always that you are, and to just put in any questions that you might have. As the host, I suppose the IHI continues to deliver these webinars free of charge to members and non-members alike as a show of support to the industry in these challenging times. For non-members, we encourage you to consider joining what is Ireland's largest learning and hospitality network. If you're interested at all, please either contact Tina or Cynthia, who as our National Exec Officer and Events and Membership Officer can help you, or please log on to the website at www.ihi.ie. So I think we'll start to kick off now. And again, a very big welcome for those of you who have joined us. It's just wonderful to have a fellow of the Institute and a pillar of global hospitality, not to mention Irish hospitality, join us this morning. So a very big welcome to you, John, and thank you for making time to this conversation this morning. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
John is non-exec chairman of Amorous, a leading hotel investment and management group. He is also founder and MD of Cloudbrook Partners, a boutique investment and advisory firm that provides advice to investors in the hospitality space. Prior to his current role, John was CEO of Amorous Hospitality, which grew under his stewardship to comprise 89 hotels, 14,000 hotel rooms, and 8,000 employees. Prior to that, John was CEO of Jury's Inn, where he repositioned the brand, added 30% more room capacity, right-sized the cost base, and created a leading hotel management platform. The last time John and I met at the wonderful afternoon tea series hosted by Michelin Core of the firm, who I believe is on the call this morning, yours and our chat then, John, was totally focused on how we could protect the wonderful returns we were enjoying in the Dublin hotel market at that time. Even at that time, though, you did tell us that in no uncertain terms that the rate and occupancy performance was unsustainable really at the level we were enjoying, and it would eventually stabilise at a lower level. Well, what a different scenario we have today. And over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, our conversation will be centred on chat through where we find ourselves today and how we can manage best through that. So welcome again, John, and thank you for joining us. We're really delighted that you're with us. I suppose when we think back to that time in the RDS and that great afternoon that we spent there listening to kind of a state of the nation and a little bit of warning from yourself, when we look now to the defining moments around hospitality, such as the financial global crisis, 9/11, foot and mouth, where would you scale, I suppose, the pandemic in that context? And additional to that, what are the key challenges that are emerging from the pandemic, and what, if any, opportunities might be emerging from it?
Thank you, Una. And boy, have things changed a lot since that conversation we had at the RDS. I think, it's fair to say that the pandemic is actually not on the same scale of anything that we've seen before. You think back to the global financial crisis where RevPARs in Ireland dropped by nearly 50% peak to trough, and by much lower numbers in other parts of the world. Here we have a situation where we're literally at a point where occupancies are below the level of being able to service the cost base of the business. Peak to trough is sort of 80% RevPAR decline, if not more in certain situations. So I think that what this particular crisis brings is a number of things, but most particularly from a business perspective, it brings a massive liquidity crisis. And I suppose the key objective for all of us as managers, investors in the industry is frankly being able to survive for when things get better. That's the number one objective. The second I think that this crisis brings is not just the business challenges, but frankly, all of the social challenges and personal challenges and healthcare crises, et cetera, which affects so many people, either directly or for that matter, just from the perspective of concern and worry relative to the situation, which again makes this situation pale in comparison to others. I suppose if we think about 9/11 as the other comparison, that the one similarity is the fact that we have a dichotomy of the big cities around the world being much more impacted than, let's say, the provincial locations. And the domestic orientated businesses being much less impacted. We saw that similarly in 9/11, particularly in the UK, and to a certain extent in Ireland, where the domestic orientated businesses were much less impacted than the big cities. In terms of challenges, as I mentioned, cash is the biggest one, and frankly, while every other element of concern is important, without that, you're not in the game. And I have great sort of credit to the people in the businesses like Peter Stack, who's the CEO of Amaris Hospitality, Richard Moore is the CEO of Almarose, another business I'm involved in, and their respective chief financial officers who are managing everything with the different stakeholders, whether they be lenders, landlords, the investors themselves, and trying to also manage the cost base as best they can to minimize the impact of the cash crunch on these businesses. The other thing that's really difficult, I think, in this particular situation is the moving goalposts. And the fact that there is a great uncertainty. And, I think we've all been in the situation, I don't know how many versions of the forecasts we've produced and how many scenarios that we've planned. And every time we plan them, we think we're taking a cautious approach to what the outlook looks like. And in reality, they've all been incredibly optimistic in comparison to what actually has transpired in terms of the situation. And even to this day, we find ourselves in a situation where we don't really know what the roadmap out of here looks like. We're all expecting that the numbers will fall. We're clearly focused on the vaccine rollout in the different jurisdictions, both the jurisdictions that we're living in and the jurisdictions that deliver us business. But I have to say, it's still quite uncertain. We expect announcements, obviously, in the coming weeks, including in the UK next week, relative to what the roadmap looks like. But I have to say, it's my personal belief it's going to be a bit slower and a bit bumpier than even to this day we think it might be.
Okay, and I suppose I think your answer there, John, that our audience will find great resonance, especially in your example. Well, about one, managing cost and trying to manage it in a very difficult situation, and two, about creating all those forecasts that you can just tear up and ignore just a week after writing them. So, I understand, and I suppose that's been identified here as well around this cash. Cash is king, and around cash flow being such a major concern for the industry. Given that kind of context, how do you feel that the shape or nature of the Irish hotel industry in terms of ownership, etc., might change in the next 2 to 4 years? Do you think that will have a knock-on effect on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that's speculated a lot about is, given the crisis of liquidity and potentially the crisis of just kind of valuation based upon the lack of revenues and the lack of profits in the industry, will there be, as happened in the global financial crisis, a very significant restructuring of ownership? And I don't think that we're going to be in that situation this time around. I think the lenders are in much better shape. The borrowers generally are in much better shape, as in they don't have as much debt as they had back then. And I think that there is a general sort of belief that this is a moment in time and that things will get better in due course. That's not to say there won't be transactions and that businesses won't change hands, because some people, particularly those that are more highly leveraged or have other form of gearing, as in the case that they have leases or ground rents or other things that make it more difficult for them, and senior debt as well. I think that there will be some of those things that will happen, but I don't see it being anything like what we've seen previously. What I do think you're seeing in the Irish industry, and Ireland, as you know, is one of the most lowly brand penetration markets in Europe, if not the world. And what we are seeing, I think, is certainly in the last 24, 36 months, particularly in Dublin, a large number of branded select service products coming into the market, and quite a few extended stay products as well. And so that will shift, I think, the mix of hotel branded properties. But I don't see any dramatic changes in the ownership, because if you look around at all of the people that bought hotels in 2009, 2010, a lot of them are very well capitalized. Some of them are publicly traded, and there is a much stronger and much more robust capital structure available for them.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I suppose you're kind of suggesting that investor appetite will stay strong, really, and particularly maybe for branded products to come into the hotel market.
Yeah, I think there's two things that sort of is happening, or that's going to play into that. The first thing is the very serious demise of the retail business. And what will happen, the alternatives to hospitality from a property investment perspective. So retail is in trouble dramatically, probably even more so in the UK than here. So there's that, asset allocation movement from people. And offices are also, under a degree of pressure, and it's uncertain as to how much that pressure will ultimately, result in downsizing of office space requirements for industries going forward. So if real estate is a yield area that you want to go into, hospitality may well be one that benefits from that. Now, that's not to say that that's going to happen, very, very quickly, because clearly hospitality has its own problems at the moment. But the underlying fundamentals of hospitality are strong. The underlying fundamentals of tourism are strong. And I think I was listening to somebody on a webinar yesterday just talking about the fact that when even there's a rumor that things are going to be loosened up from a restriction perspective, the phones start ringing off the hook in the leisure hotels, because people just want to get out and do something. Also, as evidenced by what happened in Dubai over Christmas, where they ran extremely high levels of occupancy, sometimes into the 70s, at rates that were higher than 2019, because people just wanted to go and do something different, and that was part of that. So I think that those things will happen. I think branding, this I think is the time where the rubber hits the road relative to branding. When I say branding, I mean particularly the big brands. The cost structures are very high. Everybody is looking at their costs and thinking about where they are, because literally, Peter and his team are every single payment that we make is being looked at to understand what it's for. It does
line by line,
line by line. Not even line by line, but transaction by transaction, and so you started some of these things, that you previously may have, looked at, but not to the same extent in a business of 150 million pounds of revenue. You kind of go, hold on a second, why are we doing this? So I think that the brands, the two things the brands are going to have to do, I think, one is can they deal with the potential increased traction from OTAs coming out of the crisis. Because remember, after the global financial crisis, OTAs gained a significant amount of traction. As we know, the segments that will be coming back are primarily transient. There will be a lot of availability coming back. So there's a potential for a bit of a short-term rate war relative to that. And that's where the OTAs play very, very strongly. So can they be relevant in that context? Because ultimately speaking, the way I see it is that unless the brands can bring incremental revenue or reduce your cost of distribution, it's very difficult to justify the fees. And Amaris is a predominantly entirely branded business, but other businesses that I'm involved in are not and have their own brands. And I think the second thing that is going to have to be questioned is, will they be agile enough to market in a much more focused and much more localized manner in the recovery than what they historically have done, which is a lot more regionally and global how they approach things. So because the availability of demand will be most likely local in the short term. So you're going to have an offering and an approach and a marketing scheme that really focuses on that.
Indeed, and in fact, yesterday I was also on a webinar. We were talking about that, that compunction to really create the compelling reason, and a value proposition for a very localized market in a very competitive marketplace that's going to be Ireland this summer and really for the next 12 months due to the lack of international visitor. So on that point, and John, just you touched a little bit on it there about repurposing, I suppose, of hotels, and it's something that's been talked about quite a bit around how, maybe hotel space, we obviously have lots of it, and there's been the crisis has been most felt in our city environments where, which was kind of more conference and MICE led. Have you seen any successful, we've seen great, I suppose, first off, great innovation from our hoteliers in terms of food and product innovation. A lot of them are now have retail outlets on their website in terms of selling hotel wares and products there, and really working to diversify their revenue streams. But in terms of hotel repurposing, have you seen any successful examples of that, or maybe a shift into healthcare for some of our previous hotel buildings in the UK or further afield?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the what is it they describe it as? Sheds and beds, right? But now it's sheds, meds, and beds. Okay. So medical being a very significant real estate asset class that people believe will grow significantly as we go forward. Listen, I think there's always been hotel repurposing, right? If you look at the conversion, particularly from hotel use to residential. I remember when I first moved to Hong Kong in 1994, they were knocking down the Hilton, which is one of the most successful hotels on Hong Kong Island, to turn it into apartments. The Waldorf Astoria is going through a similar situation at the moment, which will result in a small hotel and a very large residential component. We did it a bit in the Four Seasons in Dublin, where we converted the top floors to residential apartments and successfully sold them. So there's been a lot of that in the past. I think there certainly are some regional hotel locations where medical centers are appropriate, and actually, just before the crisis, we at Amaris were about to sell one of our properties to a healthcare operator, which is in the middle of the UK, and the alternative use value is very, very strong. But I think it really comes down to what are the alternative demand sources. So we know that retail is not really a play anymore, right? We know that housing is an issue, and housing is a demand factor, but then you've got the cost of conversion relative to the alternative, which can be quite challenging to make that work. So that seems to work very, very well in high-priced rental in prime cities. It doesn't work everywhere, and I think what you're also seeing is the extended stay market has been particularly robust during the crisis. Not so much, not only in the UK, but also in the US quite significantly, where their occupancy falls were significantly lower than what we've seen in transient hotels. Is that something that will play into, potentially repurposing certain hotel units into a mixture of extended stay and transient hotel accommodation? I think possibly yes. I think the other thing that's happened, and the other thing that's very significant, is the sort of retail food and beverage, the high street food and beverage business, which is predominantly leasehold in nature, has been decimated by the crisis. So how does that work in terms of the utilization of potentially hotel ground floor space in different ways to accommodate retail food and beverage outlets, where you can, on a revenue share basis or some other form of profit share basis, some other form of partnership, you can do a lot more and be more creative using those kinds of things. On the other side of the equation, I think what's interesting is the repurposing of retail, and retail is very difficult to repurpose because the floor plate is very, very large, particularly in the sort of legacy big buildings and high streets around the place. But interesting enough, a couple of companies have worked on that, and one of the most interesting ones I saw recently was the Zedwell Hotel in London, which is a 600-bedroom hotel inside of the old Criterion building on Leicester Square. 12 square meter rooms, no windows, and the benefit of that then is you don't have a problem with the floor plate anymore. So you can actually repurpose that retail. And I know that for those of us who are classical hoteliers and come from that background, the concept of A, no windows, and B, 12 square meter rooms is really hard to get your head around.
It's a hard sell, John.
having said that, having stayed in the Zedwell, very, very high quality finish, beautiful bed linens, obviously perfect sleep, no noise. Amazing HVAC system, HEPA standard. So, all your pathogens taken away by your HEPA system, great shower, all that kind of stuff. And critically, at a very cheap rate in the heart of the city. Yeah. And, for the value conscious customer, and another group that's doing the same thing is Z Hotels, which are not the same group, but also in and around prime walking destinations within London. And interesting, the gentleman who founded Criterion is basically a retail property guy by background. And the only thing he said was, I've got no other options. Hospitality gives me an option that is, pro trend, and there's very little else I can do with the space. And offices are not in demand. So that was an interesting repurposing of a building that I thought was quite innovative, highly controversial.
Absolutely.
Highly controversial, and only time will tell whether it's successful or not, but there you go.
Yeah, and it's funny because, we talked about it a little bit yesterday in our prep call, and I suppose I thought about it afterwards, and my first reaction was, windowless rooms. But actually thinking about that, I suppose it's really focusing on the core, the hero product of a good night's sleep, and as you say, good shower, good facility, and a really safe environment with the HP vac system that you spoke of. So as you say, time will tell whether we can adapt to that in an Irish context.
And obviously, it's not permitted under Irish building code. Westminster has approved it in London, as have a number of other locations in Europe and in North America. So just interesting.
Okay. And just, I suppose, something that just bring kind of linking in, I suppose, to trying to come out of this crisis, and, maybe to talk a little bit about how and when you think recovery will happen, and what are quite topical here is the government supports that are needed, John, to actually help the business transition, to recovery in a successful way. Because obviously, as Ireland's largest Indigenous employer and responsible for 1 in 10 jobs, it's a critical kind of pillar of the Irish economy. And what do you think needs to be put in place to help hoteliers and hospitality and tourism businesses overall?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the government supports that have been put in place have been incredibly helpful to the situation, both in Ireland and in the UK. We all would like more clarity and more of a roadmap relative to how things are going to develop and when things are going to open. And I think that's just only natural because these are our businesses. We're trying to think about how that will all work. But at the same time, the public health issues are clearly a priority and understandably so. I think the one thing I'd say about support, I think we're not going to have a light bulb moment, in my view, where things recover. I think this is going to take some time. I was reading a report from Jones Lang LaSalle this week, which indicated their view of profit recovery to 2019 levels in the gateway cities, not until 2025. Wow. I think that's a little bit pessimistic, but their view of life is it's 1 year before that, you get ADR recovery. A year before that, you get occupancy recovery, and that's how you build back up to the
refining as you go, as such
profitability number. Let's hope it's a bit quicker than that. I do think that for the gateway cities in particular, Dublin, London, and other big cities across Europe, it's going to be 2023 before we get, I think, a robust demand picture, because these cities require, not only do they require all the geographies, they also require all the segments. They're mostly bigger hotels, so you can't necessarily replace all the business with a single segment or a single geography. So government support in that area, I think, from a cost perspective, in terms of rates and other things, will be helpful. And then the other thing is to help the industry with demand generation. And demand generation, I think, is the obstacles to demand generation. One of the big obstacles to demand generation is going to be airlift and the recovery of airlift. And so encouraging that and incentivizing that, I think, is very important. Working on all the other sort of enablers of demand is also important. And clearly, the VAT situation it will be important in that context, as will funds from a marketing perspective to be able to help the industry to recover, and indeed anything else that can be done to support the development of the industry as we come out of this crisis, and not just kind of go cold turkey relative to the support mechanisms. I was encouraged yesterday. The Scottish government announced, in advance of Boris Johnson's announcement on Monday, the continuation of the rates waiver until the end of 2021, which is hugely helpful. And one suspects that Nicola Sturgeon is putting pressure on Boris to do the same thing in the UK, in England and Wales. And so things like that, I think, are important, because I just think it's going to be, it won't be a light bulb moment where things just get switched back on again.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because I suppose at the start of this crisis, we all felt, say this time last year when we kind of shut down originally, we probably felt, oh, wait until we reopen. And we had that kind of window during the summer where it felt a little bit normal. But since then, it's been very hit and miss, I suppose. And we're beginning, I think, to understand exactly what you say, John, that our recovery is going to be much more transitional, and it's going to take a lot of layering of different factors to actually help us back on the road.
Remembering, of course, that the bounce in the summer was not universal, and in the big gateway cities we didn't see that recovery, because the other factor that people I know understand, but when you disaggregate it, the impact of events, sporting occasions, access to theater, access to restaurants, etc. That's why people come to big cities. It's not, and all the cultural activities. So until those are available and up and running in the normal way, even domestic demand for city activity is going to be muted.
Yeah, absolutely. And subdued. Interesting. And John, that leads us on to, I suppose, a topic that has gained a lot of traction during this crisis is sustainability. And certainly in the consumer sentiment, we're seeing kind of high leaning in towards, sustainable practices in all kind of businesses that people are interacting or engaging with. And I suppose it's gaining really a lot of relevance, is what we would say. Can I ask, are investors prioritizing this now? Are they prioritizing sustainability when they're conducting their evaluations? And does it have equal weighting against the other elements they evaluate against?
Yeah, I think there's been a significant shift in the last 12, 24 months relative to the focus on not just environment, but ESG, so environment, sustainability, and governance. So I suppose the broader societal impact of business activity, on society and with society. Mm-hmm. I think IHG just announced their new 10-year plan relative to what they're trying to do in that area. And I think that one of the things that is happening is that investors are certainly, particularly institutional investors, are beginning to really put a focus on this area. I think, somebody said that 1 in 3 investors now, has, 89% of investors now, institutional investors, have a focus to a great or moderate extent on the ESG components of the businesses that they're investing in. You will have seen that Premier Inn just raised green bonds, which are effectively bonds that are funded from financial backers who invest in companies that have a sustainable and appropriate approach. And I think the other thing that's happening is, from a consumer perspective, particularly from a younger consumer perspective, the numbers are quite dramatic in terms of what the millennials and Generation Z believe in supporting companies and giving their business to companies that have a high focus on sustainability, but also as an employee want to identify with companies that have that similar ethos. Mm. And I think it was quite interesting that last year Intercontinental Hotels bought Six Senses, a company that was built with environmental and ESG principles at its heart, for a very, very large price, because it ticked, I think, three components of the boxes for IHG. One, it was in the luxury sector, which was important to them. Secondly, was the fact that it was in the lifestyle sector, which is also a growing focus from a consumer perspective. And yeah. Thirdly, it was built on principles of sustainability and principles of ESG.
Interesting. And it's I suppose it's heartening to hear that, because I suppose what's happening then is investment is kind of mirroring what's happening at consumer level, and obviously we all want to support better environment and climate all around. And I suppose there's lots of initiatives here to support wider industry, and certainly at a domestic level as well, to support that. So hopefully we'll see that gain greater traction.
And it is challenging, and like you think about, when you're sort of doing a renovation or you're doing a conversion of a property, some of these things do cost a little bit more money. Some of them have almost instant, a dedicated payback profile. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in investing in energy conservation activities, energy conservation equipment, etc., you can get a proper payback on that. But I suppose what will happen, I think, and what seems to be happening, is the increased societal focus on this area is going to continue to push government regulation and government initiatives in the area. And also, I think people will, sort of vote for companies that they can, that they sort of feel aligned to from that perspective. And I think there was a Barclays survey out there recently which indicated that for the first time, actually, and they've been doing the survey for a couple of years, for the first time, consumers said that they would spend up to 10% more for accommodation in a hotel environment which had strong environmental principles and was identifiable in that respect.
Okay, so I suppose in some ways they want to see their own sentiments mirrored in the hospitality experiences that they take. That's the learning from that one, isn't it? Really,
And I think, like everything in our industry, because capital is so constrained. Capital investment is so it's a heavy capex industry. Finding ways to incorporate this needs to be done over a period of time, not instantaneously. And I think it's about, kind of incremental progress rather than necessarily thinking that this can all be done immediately.
Okay. So a slow burn, but we're on the right road, hopefully. And John, one of the things that's of great concern to the industry in Ireland at the moment, and we've heard a lot about it through both IHF and IHI, through our own Hospitality Professionals Day, is a lot of migration of talent away from the hospitality industry and sector, and really middle management and staff retention becoming a key issue. I suppose from casting your own mind back to when you were a general manager, and what skill set would you encourage hoteliers to develop among their teams now that might prove valuable to them for the long term? And I suppose really where's the value in investing or upskilling in the industry as you see it at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we've got this moment in time relative to COVID, which is clearly a situation where there are some tough decisions to be taken. And every time you have to make those tough decisions, you always kind of think about the impact on people and families, etc. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, the first thing to do is to ensure that you're here tomorrow for the people that are working with you and will work with you again. Because if you're not, there's no point, right? So those tough decisions that you're taking, and the manner and care with which you do that is hugely important, because many of these people will hopefully come back to your business in due course. I think that when you think about the skill sets, I mean, clearly agility and adaptability, if we've learned nothing in this past period, is absolutely key. And that agility and adaptability, is from organizations and from people and from leadership relative to what needs to be done. At the end of the day, I think, my personal view has always been that it starts with having the right culture in your organization. A culture that respects employees, that respects people in general, that focuses on giving people, an environment which is good to work in, all the necessary tools, all the necessary training, all the necessary support mechanisms relative to what you do. The industry is not going to be for everybody forever. That's the nature of our industry. We have a lot of people who come into our industry when they're young. They may already be in college. They may be doing other things. And equally, as people then grow and develop, is making sure that there's a very clear career path for people to be able to grow and develop themselves within the industry. And ultimately, if they want to focus on it, that you provide them with the necessary support to be able to do that. I think we've all learned over the years that having a more flexible environment from an employee perspective, giving people the ability to work differently at different times, in different ways to suit their personal schedules. Those are things that help in terms of the retention situation. I think that businesses that do focus on having the right culture, B, focusing a lot in terms of training and development, and C, giving people a clear career path relative to what they can do, have much higher retention rates than businesses that don't. And I think that's a priority at an organizational level, but it's also a priority at a leadership level within the businesses. So if you're a general manager, I suppose your personal commitment to these things is hugely relevant. People work for people. If people believe that you believe in them and you believe in the things that you're trying to do as part of that, it's far more likely that they're going to be sort of willing to work with you and not only to contribute to the short term, but also stay with you longer and develop your careers to a greater extent. I do think also that we talked about the ESG and just the general sort of kind of, that cultural element from a company perspective, it also ties in, and so it's a, you can kind of look at it in sort of very esoteric things, but you can also look at it in very practical things. I think that's a key focus.
Okay, so really getting that kind of balance between the culture fit and the employee, and linking it all together. And there's quite a lot of linkages through all that you've chatted through, John. And I suppose just in terms of, we talk about the recovery, that it's going to be transitional. You've talked about the fact that liquidity is king. In terms of right sizing cost base, and I know lots of the hoteliers on the call would have done a lot of work in this already, but just linking through, is there anything kind of that, practical steps that you can, or that you can talk through, maybe just to make sure that everyone has done what they can to help and protect the cash flow that's really so necessary for their survival and sustainability as a business?
Yeah. So just going back to the issue of people, I mean, the other thing that is very important, I think, is, when you talk about people and you talk about our industry, for me, you can't talk about that without talking about the customer. And because ultimately speaking, if you work in an environment where the customer enjoys their experience and the customer is getting good service and the customer is getting an experience that they value, one of the greatest things that we get in our industry is almost instantaneous feedback from guests, right? You don't get it as a CEO, you don't get it as a chairman, but you get it, when you work in property, right? And it's one of the things I think that so it's a virtuous circle relative to how you do things. Because if employees are coming to work every day and customers are saying, we're complaining about this, we're complaining about that, we're complaining about the other, it's not going to be a place you're going to want to work in.
Yeah, true.
Whereas customers say, this is a great place, whether you're talking at the very high ends, the kind of Four Seasons experience, or you're talking at the select service or the mid-market end, where people just feel as though for the money that they're paying, this was a great experience. I got treated really well. I got engaged with really, really well. People valued me as a human being. I think that's a key factor in employee satisfaction and employee engagement.
And yeah, and that's just on that, sorry, that's just interesting, because I suppose one of the things that we're trying to talk to industry about just in our work, and just I know at a broader level from a Fáilte point, is around that kind of service delivery and that ring fencing, that value pricing piece. But linking it with the employee satisfaction is just an interesting perspective, and really understandable and clear.
Yeah, so going back to the more mundane side of things in terms of costs. Listen, I think that this is a time to go back and just think about every cost that you have in the business, and make sure that A, that you've evaluated whether you really need it or not, and B, if you do need it, is there a better way of doing it? Is there a more effective, more efficient way of doing it? Is there a way of using technology to a greater extent? Now, the technology challenge is often, is another liquidity issue, because you possibly don't have capital to be able to deploy. But technology does have a role to play relative to reducing costs and improving efficiency. I think the other thing is it's a sort of an age-old story, but going back to all of your suppliers, making sure that you have bid out every activity that you are going to have, that you ensure that there's an appropriate competitive process in the purchasing of items, making sure that you have thought about and engage with suppliers relative to liquidity. Are there things that can be done in terms of payment terms to not pay, but to defer payment on a agreed basis if you have a particularly tight cash position in a given week or a given month or whatever it is. Now, some of that happens naturally, by the very nature of how it works. Most of the big brands, for example, have been willing to negotiate deferred payment terms on accruals of management fees or franchise fees or other things. But it's all of those things. And I think what most businesses have been able to do, and certainly know from an Amaris perspective, we've been able to do very effectively, is to reduce that break-even point relative to the operation of the business, and get to the point where you are able to be break even, initially at a operational level, and then obviously at all the way down to the net operating income level, and then ultimately down to the level below debt service, etc. But try to bring that break even point down, because with the break even point being lower, clearly it gives you a lot more flexibility to survive a extended period of dislocation. And I think that's more difficult in hotels that have, multiple revenue streams and high levels of leisure business, for example, and spas. It's much higher at the luxury end, just by the very nature of these kind of hotels. But even there, I think there is an opportunity to think about how do you do things, and is there a different way of delivering service? Is there a different service mix that's appropriate, while at the same time, giving customers, high levels of hospitality and high levels of service where it actually adds value, rather than thinking about it in the traditional sense, this is just the way we've always done it.
So a real opportunity, I suppose, for people to, obviously some solid tips, but opportunity to reimagine, recalibrate really the industry and like their process within their business, to ultimately, hopefully protect the cash that they have and to enable them to sustain and thrive a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing is remembering that the spend needs to be focused on the guest contact areas of the business, and also, in the essential elements of the employee aspects of the business, and finding ways to kind of prioritize that and redirect spend to those areas is what we're all challenged to do at this moment in time, or maybe even more importantly, will be challenged to do as we come out of this situation in the coming months, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we all hope that. And John, look, some great learnings there from around. I mean, well, we've covered a lot, and I'm conscious of time. Some comments coming in, great insight. Satisfied customers, people commenting, satisfied customers, excellent presentations. No real questions, because I think you've answered so much in our conversation today, and it's really been wide ranging. Is there anything that you would like to summarize? But from us, it's a very big thank you.
I think that it's really challenging, I think, and I think back to my days of being a general manager and running hotels during some of these crisis situations. It's really challenging because you're the leader of the business, or leader of a department, or a leader of a team. And you yourself are uncertain as to how the situation is going to evolve. So I suppose the key message is one, look after yourselves, look after your own health and mental health, and two, stay positive. I mean, I think that this industry has proven itself resilient over the years. This is a unique situation. But with the rollout of the vaccines and everything else, I think that we have things to look forward to, and try to imbue that spirit with your employees, and then focus then on rebuilding your businesses as we come out of this, and rebuilding the businesses from a commercial perspective, from a revenue perspective, from a profit perspective, and also from an investment perspective, and an investment perspective not just in product, but also in people as we go forward.
Yeah, we are a people-centric industry, and we need to keep that center stage. I can't let you off without one question from a past employee of yours. So Stephen Meehan, who's general manager at the convention center, and he is singing your praises here and saying your care, adaptability, and standards focus were the skills you admire most. But what he wants to question is, over the next decade, how do you envisage innovation where technology can be used in hospitality without sacrificing culture, to manage costs and deliver authentic experiences for customers in hospitality? So that's quite a question there. It'd be lovely if you could. Yeah.
Listen, first of all, I do think that there are innovations coming and already deployed in certain areas. I talked to a group actually in California last week who have a AI powered automated revenue management tool, which is very, very effective and very impressive. I think there'll be a lot of machine learning type things that will be coming for the sort of the automation of the administrative processes in our industry. And the other thing that's happening, and clearly the pandemic has been one of the accelerants to this, is, I used to always tell the story about, going to an Apple store to buy a product many years ago when we didn't have Apple stores in this area. And the key thing was how fast it was to buy something.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody could sell it to you. All they did put it. So our industry is very slow to adapt to those kind of things. But I think we're getting there. The contactless elements of things are important. For example, this is Zedwell Hotel I mentioned to you, fully automated check-in for that. But that doesn't mean that there can't be, very high levels of hospitality as well. Yeah. I think what we need to do is just move away from the processing of activities and focus our people on the value add customer service elements. It'll mean less people. They probably will be more highly paid. But I think we need to get as much of the processing out of the industry and focus more on that customer engagement element of things.
And that'll allow for a more valuable relationship. And I suppose that's where we're kind of seeing that the business is moving from more transactional really and kind of using technology, as you say, to take process out. And it would be valuable for us then to put our guest even more center stage than they currently are maybe, and really being able to listen and understand their needs. And I John, there's lots of, go ahead.
The other thing that will happen is you'll end up with a more, in some respects, you could end up with a more tailor-made element of an experience, as in the employees are there to engage with the customers who really want to have that engagement around certain things, whereas they're not, taking X number of minutes to check somebody in, which I think are filling in details that they should have been able to provide, online, or having a guest history process that results in all the wrong information in the wrong place. I mean, that's how by getting that information right, not having to repeat things that have been done before, not having to repeat things that should be part of the earlier part of the process, you then become more value added relative to the actual engagement with the customer.
Absolutely. And John, the compliments are flowing in for you, I have to say, for those that have worked with you in the past and have been lucky enough to. One final word, I suppose hospitality has been your career. Have you any message, because I know we have some students on the call from various colleges, have you any message for the students out there just as they embark on their career in hospitality?
Well, all I can say is, enjoy it. It only works if you enjoy it. It only works if what we do resonates with you. It resonated with me from a very young age, even though my father, who was in the hotel business as well, tried to convince me otherwise, and stunningly unsuccessful with both myself and my brothers. So there you go. But I think you have to enjoy it, and you have to find an area of the industry, and the industry has become a lot more sophisticated over the years than it was before. An area of the industry where your talents can be put to best use, where you get the most reward from it personally, and equally that suits your personality and your personal objectives in terms of what you're trying to do as an individual. So I think that's the message I'd have for you. And I think the other thing to say that it's getting as much experience as you can in different locations and different places helps to build up an overall perspective on the industry that gives you as much breadth as you can relative to what's on there. And I think of Stephen Meehan and all of his journeys around the world, and things. It's a good example of somebody who's gotten the perspective of the industry in multiple dimensions and has been very successful as a result of that.
Okay, great. John, on that note, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and commitment and for being so generous in sharing all of your insights into hospitality as it evolves, and lockdown 3.0, as you say, and how we can manage our way out of that. So thank you very much.
The sun is shining, and a big thank you and big compliment to you and the Institute for the great work that you do, and the great work you do for the industry, and the great work you're doing at the moment to keep everybody connected in these difficult times.
Thank you. And on that note, it leads well on to next week. We actually have a series of webinars running Tuesday through Thursday, focused on really supporting mental health and physical and nutritional health for any of our members and for your employees. So again, for details, please go to our website or contact Tina or Cynthia to get full details of that. You have to register separately for each webinar. So on that note, for where the sun is shining in Dublin, that was a great start to the day, John, and thank you again. And to everybody else, keep safe, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.